why is dribbling hard for some people but easy for others? In this video, I'm gonna break down some of the little details, things that most people aren't thinking about that are gonna help you improve those handles instantly if you're one of those players that it's hard for, and break down the reasons that it's hard for some people and not for others. Throughout the video, I'm gonna give you some little tips and drills that you can do to help improve your handles if you're finding it hard right now. And at the end of the video, I'm gonna link you to another YouTube video that'll help you instantly improve your handles today. Coach Muench with Get Handles Basketball, where we train harder and smarter so you can play like the pros. The very first thing that I notice with players that have a hard time dribbling the basketball and getting better at dribbling is something a lot of people don't think about. It's your wrists. You gotta have mobile and coordinated wrists. And what I see with a lot of players when they're having a hard time with dribbling is their wrists are really stiff and rigid, and even if their arm motion is fluid, a lot of times they'll have their hands always in one really tight spot. So also the hands. Players that are fluid with their dribbling, if you watch them and they're comfortable with their dribbling, this wrist is gonna really kind of curl in and those fingers are gonna curl on the release. That just kind of smoothens things out, gives you a little extra power on the dribble, keeps your hands closer together and directs the basketball better where you want it to go. Players that don't have that often dribble stiffer and they have a little bit lower ball on hand time, which if you don't know what that is, I go over it a lot, but it's basically right now the basketball is in my hand, now it's not. You want to maximize the time that the basketball is in your hand each dribble, so that gives you more control. That's one of the big reasons that you might have a hard time dribbling, is because you don't have that high ball and hand time. This will really help with that though, getting that wrist flexibility in and the flick. When you're releasing your dribbles, almost think about bending your wrist down and trying to have your fingers touch your base of your palm right here, like this. Now, you don't actually need to dribble that way, but just exaggerating that and practicing that can really help. So if you'll notice, when I'm releasing, my hand's scooping all the way up and pointing towards the ceiling on my crossover. On my regular dribble, I'm gonna scoop it so my fingers are pointing back there, okay? Just to get in the habit of exaggerating that. And then when you go into game situations, you can dribble a little more naturally, keeping that in mind. A couple other things you can do is just wrist circles, making fists, and then having your hands come out as wide as you can, trying to get them super wide. You can bend your fingers back to get the mobility in them, bend them down to get the mobility in them. You can bend your wrists down and bend your wrists back. If you feel like your wrists are just stiff, those are a few things you can do to help. So the next thing is also something that most players would never think of when it comes to improving your handles, and you gotta be looking at this. This is must do. It's hip mobility. And you're like, well, what do my hips have to do with my handles? And the answer is a ton. And that's one of the reasons so many players have a hard time improving their handles, because they don't even think to look in areas like this. So when I'm talking about hip mobility, I mean your ability to get in these wide stances, to get low comfortably and not feel like you're really straining to stay low in that position. If you're getting a sore back, it's probably because you have hip mobility issues. If you're just having a hard time getting here, you have hip mobility issues. The reason why getting in those stances is so important is two reasons, really. Number one, if I get into this low stance, like we talked about before, I have a high ball and hand time, right? Because my hands are lower to the ground. So just by getting more hip mobility, you can get into those stances better. I'm gonna show you how to get that hip mobility in a second. Plus now you're ready to move more quickly, you're on better balance, you can go in either direction. And then the second big reason it's helpful is because with hip mobility, you can be more fluid with your movements. If you don't have hip mobility, you're gonna be really stiff with your movements and take choppy steps, and your moves are gonna look super stiff when you're trying to sell a fake. Adding hip mobility allows you to sway your hips and your chest into your fakes, make them more convincing, make them more fluid, make them more controlled. So all those keys came just from getting your hip mobility down. Now I'm gonna link to you at the end of the video a really quick way to mobilize your hips. It's a quick YouTube video I have that'll show you exactly how to do that. But maybe you have the hip mobility, but you're just not using it. Well, if that's you, then one thing you'll wanna pay attention to is when you're doing your fakes, that you're leaning into them with your hips and your chest. So a good way to tell that is, are my feet about time and a half, maybe 2 times shoulder width apart, and that one leg is bent, one is straight, that your butt is low while you're doing that, not that you're up here like this. You want to be down here like this. Those are little keys and things you want to look at. Now, part of it too might be you just need to work on getting comfortable and building up some of the strength to stay in those stances, but getting your hip mobility will really help get you to that level a lot more quickly without it feeling like it's so hard. One thing I like to add into the mix to make sure you're getting into those low stances when you practice is to just add some sort of a ground touch. And I always like to try to have left hand in front of right foot or right hand in front of left foot, but really any type of ground touch will help make sure that you're getting lower to the ground. That's really important that you start making that a habit. You don't necessarily need to actually touch the ground in game situations, but by doing that in your drills will get you in the habit of staying low. Next big thing is grip and feel for the basketball. I see this with a lot of players that, not so much players that have big hands, because obviously they're able to get a pretty good grip or feel for the basketball, but with like younger players that they just don't have a good feel for the basketball, and it comes into their hands, it kind of bobbles in their hand, or it's sliding all around in their hand, and they're not really getting a good control over it really quickly. This will help you a lot with that. Now at the end of the video, I'm going to give you a link to some grip exercises that you can do to work on your ability to palm the basketball if you can't, or if you can, just to improve your hand strength and flexibility. And I'm also going to give you one other thing later in the video that's going to help you with this. One of the things you can do to really help is focus on getting your hands wide when it comes onto the basketball, not catching it with your hands tight like this. Get them nice and wide and get those fingers on the basketball. You don't have to worry about your palm touching the basketball. I hear so many coaches say that. That's bogus. Watch the best NBA players. Their palms touch the basketball from time to time. I'm not saying it should touch the basketball, but what I am saying is make sure the ends of your fingers, not the tips, but the ends of each of your fingers are on the basketball nice and wide, so you get a nice wide base with your fingers, and then grip those fingers in hard. And if your palm happens to touch the basketball, it's not the end of the world. You want to get that kind of grip though every time the basketball comes into your hand. Doing that will give you a much better feel for the basketball, because if you're getting that kind of grip, now I'm instantly in control. I can do whatever I want a lot more easy, efficiently, fluidly. It doesn't feel so hard for me. Besides that, a lot of it just comes from getting your head up and trying to feel the basketball. Literally feel it, right? Getting a feel from for the basketball comes from practicing feeling the basketball. And then besides that, just trying to palm the basketball. That can help you a lot. And if you can't get even close to that, just put your other hand under the basketball and squeeze those fingers in as hard as you can. Hold that for like 20, 30 seconds, and then switching hands and doing the same thing with the other hand. Next tip I don't need to go into too much depth on because we kind of talked about it, but I want to give you some extra tips to help you with it, and it's having a high ball and hand time. So those other things I gave you, like the wrist snap will help with that, low stance by improving the hip mobility will help with that, but also you have to pay attention to what you're doing to make sure you're getting that. So one thing I'd recommend you do is trying to get your hands as close to each other as you can on your crossover. So not just getting them low to the ground, but getting them close to each other so it's as close to a clap as possible. So it's almost like you're handing the basketball off without actually handing it off to keep it legal. That'll help make your feel for the basketball a lot better. Another thing that I find helpful on crossovers though is swinging both hands together. See how both my arms are coming across? I just find that helps it feel more natural, smooth, and fluid to dribble the basketball, and it makes it a lot easier to naturally go into that high ball and hand time. If my hands are out here, I have to consciously think about bringing this hand here now to catch the basketball nice and low. But if my hands are already swinging with each other, now they're boom, right next to each other. Right next to each other. So every crossover is going to feel smoother, more fluid. And that goes for all your crossovers. You're between the legs. behind the back so I can swing my arms together. And then on your one hand type dribbles, your regular dribbles and your inside out, just focus on getting that hand as low as you can on the release and on the catch. So not catching it up here, catching it down there. So you can be more in control for more of the dribble motion. That's gonna make everything fluid, more easy for you to learn, and it'll make dribbling easier if you're one of those players that finds it hard. I hate to say it, and this should be an obvious one, but it's really not. Practice. I see it with a lot of players. They're like, coach, I'm not very good at ball handling. And I'm like, well, how much do you practice? I practice like twice a week. That's a problem. You can practice your dribbling anywhere. So there's really no excuse to not be good at ball handling. You can practice in your basement, in the laundry room, garage. You don't need a lot of space to do what I'm doing right now, right? You can practice pretty much anywhere there's a surface that the ball will bounce on, so no excuses. Get your practice in. I would say at least 10 minutes every single day. I used to go for an hour every single day. In fact, I'm gonna link you to a video that shows you that at the end as well. That's gonna kind of give you some idea of like what that did for my handle. But you can't improve that feel for the basketball and make all these tips I'm giving you habit if you're not getting enough repetitions in to make it a habit with your body. So here's that video about me dribbling for an hour every day and what it did for me. Here's the one on how to improve your grip. Here's the one that'll open up your hips if you have problems with your hip mobility. And here's some things that you should be practicing to help you get your handles down. These are 5 crossover moves you must master. So those are gonna help you a ton. If this video helped you, click like, subscribe, and click that bell icon to catch the newest videos, and I'll see you in one of these videos.